All right, this video is reviewing 7.5, which is changing a fraction into a decimal. As a quick review, in place value, you should first of all be able to label all of these. If you cannot, then you really need to go back and rewatch the other videos. So the decimal place, anything on this side of the decimal place is a part of a whole, or a decimal, or a decimal fraction, and anything on this side of the decimal place is a whole number. So these are our ones, our tens, and our hundreds. On this side, where it's the decimal, we have our tenths, and we have our hundredths. When we talk about changing fractions into decimals, we usually think about 3/10 or 45 hundredths. And as we can see, the tenths go in the tenths place and the hundredths go in the hundredths place. 7.5 deals with fractions that are not in tenths and hundredths, like a fourth. There is no fourths place, so we cannot write the decimal 1/4 as a decimal as it is. It doesn't work. It's not in our place value. However, we can change the numbers using what we know about equivalent fractions into tenths or hundredths, which are our place values. In 5th grade, you'll get 2000s, and that would also be an option. As of right now, we are in tenths and hundredths. So again, if I have 1/4, I can either make it into a tenth or I can make it into a hundredth. Well, I can't make 4 into a 10 for a 12 because when I skip count, I never hit the number 10. So 1/4 cannot be turned into tenths. I do know, again, 4 times what gets me to 100. In money, 100 would be equivalent to $1, and there are 4 quarters in a dollar. Each quarter is worth 25 cents. Therefore, 4 times 25 gets me to 100. And if I multiply the denominator by 25, I have to multiply the denominator by 25, and I get 25 hundredths. Now I can write 25 hundredths in my as a decimal. Again, I cannot put 25 in the hundredths place. That's too many. I need to regroup the two. So 25 hundredths looks like that. When you're done, you need to read it and make sure it matches. Does this say 25 hundredths? And this should say 25 hundredths. If you read it and it doesn't match, then that means that your answer is incorrect. Okay, we are going to practice. If you feel like you know what you're doing and you are just here to practice, then you are going to pause the video, solve all 3 of these, and then press play. If you are here because you are very confused and don't really know what I'm talking about, then you need to listen and not write anything down while I do these 3 problems. So again, 2/5. 2/5 I cannot make into a decimal because as I know that decimals based on my place value are only in tenths or hundredths. So a 5th isn't up there. I can't make a decimal into a 5th. But I can change my 5th into tenths or I can change it into hundredths. You get to pick. I'm going to pick tenths because that's easier. And now I'm making an equivalent fraction. I know that I times 5 by 2 to get to 10. So I know that I also need to do the same to my numerator. 2 times 2 is 4. That says 4/10. So then I know that I need to write a 4 in the tenths place. This says 4/10 and this says 4/10. Now I'm going to do 9/20. Again, 9/20 I cannot put into a decimal because it is not in tenths or hundredths. I could technically pick tenths because I know 20 divided by 2 is 10, but it's not going to work because I can't do 9 divided by 2. So I'm not going to pick tenths for this one. I'm going to change 20ths into hundredths. Now, 20 times what gets me to 100? If you skip count 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, you skip counted 5 numbers. So that means I'm multiplying my numerator and denominator by 5 in order to make this equivalent fraction. 20 times 5 is 100, and 9 times 5 is 45. So my new decimal, that reads 45 hundredths. So I need to write a decimal that says 45 hundredths. If you go to write something like this, then that is incorrect because that says 4 and 5/10. These don't match. It needs to sound and be read the same way as the fraction. Okay, one more. If I have 5 halves, this one can get tricky because it's an improper fraction, meaning the numerator is bigger than the denominator. That doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. you still have to change this into tenths or hundredths because decimals are in tenths or hundredths. I'm going to change this to tenths because I know that 2 times 5 gets me to 10. Since I multiplied the denominator by 5, I'm going to multiply the numerator by 5. 5 times 5 is 25. Okay, if I have 25 tenths and I'm thinking about place value, this is my tenths place. I can't put 25 things in my tenths place. That's too many. I can't have more than that. So, or I can't have that many. So I need to regroup. So I'm going to regroup the 2, and I have 2 and 5 tenths, which makes sense because 25 tenths is an improper fraction. I can pull out 1 10 tenths and 2 10 tenths. So that's 20 tenths. Oops, sorry, I threw my marker. And then I have 5 tenths left over. 2 and 5 tenths. 2, the decimal means and, 5, and it's in the tenths place. Okay? Now you are going to practice the next ones on your own. So you're going to stop and pause and see if you can figure these out. When you're ready, press play. Okay, if I have 2 3/5, that is a mixed number, but that does not matter or change anything. This just tells me that this is the whole, so I know that my answer is going to be 2 point something because I know that I have 2 wholes and this is my ones place and this is my fraction, so it's going to be in my decimal place. So again, if I have 2 3/5 and I want to change my fifths to be either tenths or hundredths, I'm going to pick tenths because I know that 5 times 2 is 10 and I know that 3 times 2 is 6. So I get 2 6 tenths. Well, now I can write that. I have 2 wholes, and the 6 tenths needs to be in the tenths place. This says 2 and 6 tenths, and this says 2 and 6 tenths. Okay, now I have 9 and 1/4. Again, this says 9 whole, so I know I'm going to be 9 something because this is my fraction, so that's my part of my whole. I have 9 1/4, and I need to make this into either tenths or hundredths. I know 4 times nothing is 10, so I have to pick hundredths. I know there are 4 quarters in a dollar, so 4 times 25, because a quarter is worth 25 cents, gets me to 100. I have to multiply the numerator by 25. So I end up with 9 and 25 hundredths. So I have 9 and 25 hundredths. And I know that's how you read it because this is my 9, my and, 25, and the hundredths place. Okay, last one. This one says 5 and 27 fiftieths. Again, I see this 5, so I know I'm going to have 5 wholes, 5 and, 5 and. I need to change my 50. I'm not going to do 10. I'm going to change 50 to 100, and I know that 50 times 2 is 100. I don't know 27 times 2 off the top of my head, so I'm going to write it on the side of the paper. 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5, and I get 54 hundredths. So I have 5 wholes and 54 hundredths. Okay, let's keep practicing. Now, I'm going to change these 3. So press pause, try it on your own, and then press play to check. If I have 1/5, again, that's not tenths or hundredths, which is what my decimal is. So I need to change 1/5 into tenths or hundredths. I'm going to pick tenths. I multiply the 5 by 2 and then 1 by 2, and I get 2 tenths. So 1/5 as a decimal is 2 tenths. These two match each other. 3/5. Again, I already know that I'm going to be changing 3/5 to tenths. I know that's times 2, and that's times 2. I get 6 tenths, so 3/5 equals 6 tenths. Last one, I have 4/5. I'm going to make my fifths into tenths times 2, and I get 8 tenths, 8 tenths. Whatever you read should match the fraction. Whatever you read should match the fraction. So if you need to whisper, read it out loud to yourself during the test, then that's going to be a strategy that you use. All right, press pause and try these. This says 3/4. Again, I don't have in my decimal place value a place for fourths. I either have tenths or I have hundredths. So I need to change this to tenths or hundredths. I can't change a fourth to a tenth, so I'm going to change fourths to a hundredth. I know that there are 4 quarters in a dollar, so 4 times 25. Again, 3 times 25, that's just 3 quarters. 1 quarter is 25, 2 is 50, 3 is 75. So I'm going to make this 75 hundredths. So then 3/4 is 75 hundredths. I read that as 75 hundredths, and I read this as 75 hundredths. Now I'm going to do 17 twentieths. I need to make that into tenths or hundredths. I'm going to choose hundredths. Again, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 times 1, times 2, times 3, times 4, times 5. I don't know 17 times 5 off the top of my head, so I'm going to write it down on the side of my paper. 5 times 7 once is 35, so I'm going to keep my 5, regroup my 3 into the tenths. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 3 is 8, and I get 85. So if I have 85 hundredths, that's going to be 85 hundredths. Okay? Last one, 26 25ths. Again, I'm noticing that this is improper, but that does not matter. I'm going to keep it as it is, or you can change it first. So maybe you'll decide that you're going to make it a mixed number. If I have 26 25ths, I know one whole is 25 out of 25. I can pull 1 25 out of 25 out, and then if to get to 26, I have 1 left over, and then I can go from there and say, okay, well, if I have 1 in 1 25th, I need to make this into hundredths, and I get 1 and 4 hundredths. Or I can come down here and make this, keep it as an improper, and just change it to be, 25ths I'm going to make into hundredths. And that's times 4. I know that's times 4. Well, I don't know 26 times 4, so I'm going to write it on the side. 6 times 4 is 24. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10, so 104 hundredths, which I could make 104 hundredths into. Or I can look here and see that I have 1 and 4 hundredths, 1 and 4 hundredths. Okay, let's move on. Now I'm going to try these, 3 and 13 50ths. Again, 50ths doesn't work for decimals. It needs to be tenths or hundredths. So I'm going to make 50 into 100. And I know 50 times 2 is 100. And I have to do 13 times 2. If you don't know 13 times 2, then you need to write it on the side of your paper. But I can't forget about this 3 wholes. So I have 3 and 26 hundredths. 3 and 26, and it ends in the hundredths place. So that matches. Now I have 7 and 24 25ths. Again, I know that I already have 7 wholes, so I need to figure out my decimal place. I'm going to change my 25 to 100. 25 times 4. I don't know 24 times 4 off the top of my head. So 4 times 4 is 16. Regroup my 1. 4 times 2 is 8. Plus 1 is 9. And I get 7 and 96 hundredths. 7 and 96. And it's ending in the hundredths place. Last one, I have 22 and 4 fifths. This one, I actually can change the fifths to be tenths. And I know that 5 times 2 is 10, times 2 is 8. So I have 22 wholes and 8 tenths. Okay. The last part of this is going to be changing the decimal and doing the opposite into a fraction. Here's where you have to read it. You really have to read the number out loud. So I see 0 and I see a 2, and it's in the tenths place, because as a reminder, tenths, hundredths. I see this as 0 and 2, so I read it 0 and 2 tenths. So I would write 2 tenths, 2 tenths, 2 tenths. Now the only tricky part is that it says to simplify. 2 and 10 are even numbers, so I could divide them both by 2, and I get 2 divided by 2 is 1, 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2 tenths as a fraction in simplest form is 1/5. Okay, let's try this one, number 11. This says 75 hundredths. Again, because if I write this down, 75 hundredths. So I'm going to write 75 hundredths. Now I have to simplify. If I'm looking at 75 and 100, I can think 2 things. I automatically am thinking of quarters and realizing that 75 can be divided by 25 and so can 100. So I'm going to do by 25. And I know that 75 divided by 25, there's 3 quarters in that. And 100 divided by 25, there's 4 quarters in that. And I would get 3/4. Next one I have to read, it says 28. So I'm going to take this and I'm seeing 0 and 28. So I would read that as 28 hundredths because it ends in the hundredths place. 28 hundredths, so I'd write 28 hundredths. Again, I can simplify this. When I'm looking, maybe you just see that it's even and you decide to divide by 2. Well, 28, and if you don't know, do your division divided by 2, 14, and 100 divided by 2 is 50. The problem with 14/50ths is that it's still an even number, so I can divide by 2 again. 14 divided by 2 is 7, 50 divided by 2 is 25. So my final answer for number 12 would be, let me erase this, 7/25, because I found it in simplest form. Next one says, again, I'm going to write this, I'm going to read it the way it is. 3, that decimal means and, so I have 3 and 6, and it's in the tenths place. 3 and 6 tenths. 3 and 6 tenths. Again, I can simplify by dividing these by 2. They're even numbers, and I get 3 wholes. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 3 3/5. I have, for the next one, I'm just going to erase so we can see better. This says 5, so I would read this as 5 and 12 hundredths. 5 and 12 hundredths. So 5 and 12 hundredths. Again, I know that the factors of 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And I know 100 can be divided by 4. So I know that 12 divided by 4 is 3. 100 divided by 4 is 25. So I would get 5 and 3/25. All right, one more is, again, I'm going to write it on my place value. It says 4 and 35 hundredths because it's in the hundredths place. So I'm going to write it as 4 and 35 hundredths. Right off the bat, I'm seeing that 35 ends in 5 and 100 ends in 0. And because of my divisibility rules, I know that that means that it can be divided by 5. I'm going to write my answer down here. 35 divided by 5 is 7. And 100 divided by 5 is 20. So I get 4 and 7/20. So you need to know, again, how to make a fraction into a decimal by making it either into tenths or hundredths. And you need to be able to take a decimal and make it into a fraction by reading it the correct way and simplifying. Hopefully this is helpful. And if you have any questions, let your teacher know tomorrow.